You don't have to suffer to be a good artist. In fact, getting the support that you need will make you a better artist. So Nuçi Phillips was a young man who he was a musician, an artist, very creative, and he started struggling with his mental health when he was a young teenager. But as we talked about, he kind of concealed it for a long time, and the people in his life didn't realize how badly he was struggling until later. But he moved to Athens and started going to UGA in the mid to late 90s. And he started playing in a few bands around town and made a lot of friends here. But he found it to be a struggle to access mental health care that he needed because it was not affordable for him. There weren't the right supports here for him that was actually doing him any good. And he also found being a musician to be a struggle because he complained a lot that there were not affordable, safe practice spaces where he could go and make music and actually feel safe. Mm-hmm. And the ones that did exist were out of his price range. Yeah. And he had this one outlet, which was music. That was the one thing that made him feel better. And often that was a struggle too. Yeah. And so these things just weighed on him. And he died by suicide in 1997. And his mother, Linda, had been living in Atlanta. And she actually came to Athens after his death with a view to opening a foundation and some type of resource center in his name to provide other musicians with the support that Nuçi never found. And it's kind of amazing to me that she had opened Nuçi's space by 1999. So 2 years after his death, mm-hmm. she had already started this foundation and opened it and come to Athens and done all of this in his name, which is extraordinary because she was deep in her grief when she was doing all of this. But the way that she talks about it in her book is that it's really refreshing the way she talks about Nuçi because there's no judgment there. There's a little bit of anger that she talks about feeling, but in large part, she just feels compassion and empathy for him, that she was so sorry that this happened and that she wants to take his experience and use it to help other people. And there's no judgment. There's never any point where she says, why did he do, what? She just doesn't do that. And it's really refreshing to read that she wanted to start this whole legacy named after her son. And she chose the building that we are still in, which is beside the, infamous REM steeple, which is Athens music history baked right in to our space. It was originally a car garage. She had it renovated and turned it into our space and just opened this really casual, loving, safe space for people where she would serve coffee and people could come jam and rehearse. They could study if they wanted. And it has slowly become what it is now.
I'm a little curious about Linda.
Yeah.
And as we already mentioned, Linda Phillips is the mom of Nuçi. She lost her son and then built something in his name and wrote a memoir about it. And can you say the name of the memoir again?
It's called A Beautiful Here. Mm-hmm. And it is a lovely book. It is in some ways a hard read. It's very emotional, obviously, but it is a beautiful book. It's got the perfect title. And it's just, she talks a little bit about her early life and then Nuçi's early life. And then she sort of goes into his struggles and his eventual passing and starting her foundation. It's just a very good read. I would recommend it to anyone who is interested in the history of Nuçi's space, but also who is just invested in mental health. We do sell it on our website, and we actually give a copy to all of our Camp Amped kids in their senior year of camp, which is something that I really love. It's a very poignant touch that each one of them gets that book and all of our camp instructors sign it like a yearbook. And that's like one of the things that I think is so special, equipping them with the history of that place so they never forget like what our mission actually is.
Yeah, as a way for... It's like a mom packing a little lunchbox for their kid to school. It's like, I'm not going with you, but I'm still with you.
Take this with you. Yeah, absolutely.
And you work inside what she made. Mm-hmm. What have you learned about her, about the grief and being there every day? Because so far from speaking with you, I'm learning about not just her grief, but also her perseverance, her empathy, her dedication. Is there anything else about Linda Phillips that you seem to have learned just by being there? Also her little dedication to the little things, the details. It's also very
Yeah.
admirable.
So I never had the pleasure of meeting her personally, and she passed away in 2021. I do remember that day. I remember everyone was talking about it, and we were all devastated because her legacy, I mean, everybody knew who she was. And that was a very sad day. But just from working at Nuçi's and meeting people who have met her and hearing some of my coworkers talk about her, she was an authentic person. You know, she walked the walk, and her outward persona and her inward persona were the exact same person. It's not like me, you know, with my author stuff. She was who she was. And from what I've heard about her, she was just extremely empathetic and would drop everything to talk to you. In the early days of Nuçi Space, from what I've heard, she would give out her personal cell phone number, and people would call her in crisis in the middle of the night, and she would get up and go open Nuçi's doors at 3 a.m. to talk to somebody. And she would take an active kind of nurturing role with all of the people that worked for her. She loved to give people chances. She saw potential in people. Our CEO, Bob Sleppy, could talk all day about that, about how she, was so supportive and such a cheerleader for him in his early days at Nuçi Space, and how she equipped him with the support that he needed to take on that role. She was just a very authentic, caring, nurturing person. And I wish I could have met her, because everybody that I've ever talked to that did meet her thought she was incredible.
For people that don't know, because you mentioned Camp Amped, what is that and how can people get involved?
Yeah, so Camp Amped is our youth programs camp. We have sessions in spring, summer, and fall. And then the summer sessions are our longest. So for our older students, they're like 2 weeks. It's quite a long camp session. And we have many different programs that range in age. So I would recommend anybody go to our website and to the youth programs page and look at the different options, because we have so many programs. We've expanded so much that there's a little something for everybody. But my son started out early on in the sound check program, which is for younger kids, like middle school age. And he's worked his way up and actually just completed his senior year of camp. So rising seniors, as we call it, people that are going into their senior year of high school, this is their last session of camp, because you do age out. And unfortunately, eventually we have to send you out into the world. But it's a really neat experience. I've watched him grow so much. He started out just as a drummer, and he was a very talented drummer. But in the years that he's been doing camp, he's branched out and started playing guitar, bass. He does vocals now. He's been in a couple of bands already. He's played shows around town. Wow. He's just grown in confidence so much. But that is not unique to him. I mean, that's true for most of the kids that go through the Camp Amped program, is that they're just uniquely suited to go out into the world. So there's so many bands in town that feature camp alumni. And then there's a number of people that either work at Nuçi Space or have worked at Nuçi Space that came through Camp Amped. And a lot of them end up becoming volunteers later as well. It's just like once you go in that place and have that experience, you don't really want to leave. And I think that's been true for him too. And it was true for me. I watched him do camp and decided I wanted to work there. So there's just something about the energy there. It gets you.
Yeah. And the mission centers musicians, but the doors are open to anyone. So why musicians, and what do artists carry that make a place like this matter so much? And I ask this already knowing, yes, Nuçi happened to be a musician, and so that's why it was centered around this. But going a little deeper, yes, anyone can experience a brain illness. However, there's a stereotype with musicians. They're like, oh, we have the starving artist, or oh, musicians are so difficult to work with. Right. And now you're looking at this population of people, this very niche population, and it almost seems like they're more prone to a brain illness. Why? Yeah. That is one of those questions where it's like the chicken or the egg sort of thing, where you ask, do certain people go into music because of their struggles? Or is it being part of that world that exacerbates their struggles? And I mean, we don't know, it's different for everyone. But it is true that Linda Phillips focused on musicians because that was Nuçi's calling. That was what he loved. But I do agree that it does seem like musicians in particular can fall
not victim, but can be more susceptible to mental health struggles. And I don't know if it's that the music industry is just can be so hard to navigate that it makes it worse, or if it can just be, it can break your heart in some ways, trying to quote unquote make it and not doing that. It can just be a lot of things, I think. But I definitely have noticed in my time there that it is the musicians who are our biggest cheerleaders and supporters in the community. And we have so much support and goodwill from all different creative industries and walks of life, different businesses and that sort of thing. But it's the musicians who are singing our praises, who are having benefits for us all the time. I mean, we have our own fundraisers and things, but very regularly we will have a band reach out and say, I'm doing this show. Proceeds are going to go to you guys. Tell me what you need. That happens all the time. And it's bands that are just starting out that don't have a huge following, as well as bands who are quite famous.
Wow.
And we're very lucky to be supported by bands like Widespread Panic, Drive-By Truckers, REM, B-52s. All of them have done so much for us and continue to support us. And I think it's just because music is such a great unifier. Whether you're just starting out or you're super famous and have had a lot of success, you understand those struggles intimately, and you understand the importance of music as therapy and having creative expression. And so I think that's why music sort of remains the focus, is just because it is that unifier. And being in Athens, which is very well known as a music town, of course, that's going to be our focus because there's so many musicians out there and they need us.
Yeah. And going back, because you spoke a lot about Nuçi space, so I want to set this base of understanding. So Nuçi's own story, right, which is where the whole concept and space is built around, is this guy, right? He's just a guy that's a musician, but then there's a lot more to it, because his story is that he often seemed okay, but there were some cracks of struggle. And a lot of people, sometimes the ones who are most put together, are the best at hiding it. And as you mentioned with Linda Phillips, it wasn't until those cracks became gaping holes to the point where it's something that you can't ignore and will be there forever. That's when more change started happening. But her goal now is to facilitate that change before the cracks turn into something else. Why do you think that happens, where the people that are okay or seem okay that are not really are good at hiding it? Why do you think that they keep hiding it? Why do you think it helps them? And what do you think actually helps someone finally feel safe enough to be honest?
So I think some of that goes back to what we were talking about often the helpers are the ones who are also struggling and ignoring their own mental health to help other people. I think there's some of that often goes on. I think that because there is still stigma about mental illness, people don't want to admit that they're struggling because they might think it makes them look weak, or they don't want to feel like a burden to the people in their lives. They may just not be ready to confront what they're dealing with yet, because it just feels insurmountable. There's so many reasons that I think people hide what they're going through. And in Nuçi's case, just from reading Linda's book, A Beautiful Here, she does talk about how there were definitely signs early on because his personality changed a bit. He went from being super sort of hyper and silly and funny and very social to being a bit more withdrawn. But, the fact that he was a teenager and he was kind of coming into his own, she wondered if some of that was just normal teenage stuff, because all teenagers go through that. Also, he actively denied that he was as bad off as he was. There were, small instances where she was noticing things, but they were few and far between. And she sort of allowed herself to believe that he was getting better because he was hiding the fact that he was not getting better. He moved to Athens and she was in Atlanta, and he became kind of reclusive and stopped talking to her as much because he was hiding how much he was struggling. And she laments that in the book that, I should have noticed that, I should have clocked that, but hindsight is 2020. He was actively trying to conceal that from her and the rest of the family, I think, because he did not want to feel like a burden. He didn't want to have to deal with explaining. He was wary of different kinds of treatments because he felt like they weren't helping. He hadn't been able to access the type of mental health care that he needed. What few things he had tried were not helping. He was tired, and I think that's a common refrain with a lot of people that you hear about is they were just tired.
Yeah.
It gets exhausting after a while trying to care for yourself. Things aren't working. Everybody's asking you questions, trying to care for you, but it feels like pressure. And I think that's what he was going through. And he just hid so much of it from her and from his family.
It's hard to go and receive help when so much work is involved, and it's not because you're lazy, but because you're simply tired.
Yeah.
And it's not your fault necessarily that you're tired. It's the very problem is what's making you tired.
Absolutely. And that was definitely true for him, which is why Linda started Nuçi Space, that it was hard to have the energy to seek help, but when he did, he could not find adequate therapy. He couldn't find affordable mental health care and medication and things that he could access and pay for. It was just very difficult. So I imagine that, that feels terrible to finally get the motivation and the energy to go say, hey, I need help. And then there's nothing there for you. Mm-hmm. So that's the main reason that she started Nuçi Space, is she wanted to make it as easy and affordable as possible for people who are already struggling to get help.
Yeah. And then going on the flip side, instead of talking about just the child that is going through this, but also the parent that if something were to happen to another parent in a similar fashion, that grief can turn into guilt.
Yeah.
So what do you say to those parents?
Just reading through Linda's writings, I think that's something she definitely dealt with too. But then she turned it around and coached people that had gone through similar in such a compassionate and non-judgmental way. And I mean, she's not here to say, and I wouldn't want to speak for her, but I imagine that healed her in a way to console other people who were going through the same thing. Because from the very beginning that Nuçi Space opened, she had survivors of suicide support group, which is something that we still have. And she started that really early on and would console people and talk them through it. And she wrote a whole book about her experiences. So I imagine that helped her heal a bit as well. But she definitely does write about the guilt. And I think, that's just something that's a very human experience to go through in grief. And even in other situations other than suicide, there's often guilt associated with it. And it's just something that you have to work through. But I definitely think that opening Nuçi Space was the thing that healed her and allowed her to continue.
If you like this episode, feel free to like, comment, share, and follow for more. To get more mental health info and resources, feel free to contact Chasing Glass directly with any form of questions or concerns. I will be linking Nuçi Space's website and blog in the description below, so feel free to look for that or look for any other mental health resources that I will also be putting down in the description. Thanks for watching.